Dr. Tom Black from the BMA speaking first, followed by a presentation from Ryan Wilson from the Department of Health and Phil Walton, the legislation project lead for organ donation from NHS Blood and Transplant. We'll then hear a personal account from Amy Duncan and also Marcin from Donate for Dahi. Then to finish up, we'll have a short Q&A session, so feel free to ask questions throughout using the Zoom Q&A feature. And I think what I'll do, I'll introduce all our panelists just before our Q&A session, if that's okay. So we'll make a start. Dr. Black, if you could share your screen, please, for us.
Thank you very much, Emma, for the invite. I'm delighted to be here this evening, though I'm obviously here. And you can see my screen, can you?
Yep.
I see people nodding heads. And that's the first slide to remind me of who I am. So, as you can see, I'm the chair of BMA Council in Northern Ireland. Bernadette's doing my slides, so when I say next slide, it's not me talking to myself. So, what is the BMA in Northern Ireland? British Medical Association. And it's a trade union and professional association. We cover both functions, so we do terms and conditions for doctors and medical students. And we also act as a professional association where we look at the science and we give forth on opinions, and you've seen a lot of that during the COVID pandemic. We represent medical students and doctors from all branches of practice, both in primary and secondary care. And primary we would regard as mostly outside hospital, and then secondary care mostly inside hospital. But as we know, the two blend more and more as time goes on. So we cover GPs, and we cover the consultants, and we cover the SAS doctors, which is staff grade doctors. So those are hospital doctors who are senior but haven't gone down the consultant path, and they would very often have specialist role in pediatrics, oncology, and various things. Then your junior doctors, which always seems to be a misnomer, because these are doctors usually in their late 20s and 30s, but they're called junior doctors because they're doctors still in training. So they could be in training to be a GP or a consultant or a staff grade. And then we have public health doctors, and nobody used to see much about public health doctors, and then they became very famous during the pandemic. It was the first time that anyone ever says, I need a public health doctor urgently. So we'll see the next slide. So the BMA, what does it do? Support, protect, and represent. One of the best ways to describe it is our strapline, which is we look after doctors so they can look after you. And you can see that medical students can become members now. So when I was a medical student, I wasn't a member. And I think that was because there was no medical student membership. It was probably more to do with the fact that I was a Dublin graduate, so I wasn't even in the north. Let's see the next one, please, Brenda. So what kind of services do we provide for the members? And well-being and support services, you can see, are really important at the moment, and those are 24/7. But then you're looking at things like research tools, a Specialty Explorer, BMJ learning modules, because I have discovered in my career that the job changes all the time and the science changes all the time. And just to really impress upon you, we thought beta blockers were the greatest thing when I was a medical student, and now beta blockers are so common. ACE inhibitors only came out in my first year as a doctor, so the science has changed an awful lot. BMA does a lot of lobbying. Medical Student Committee met this afternoon. They do a lot of lobbying as well. And obviously we have research and Ask Dr. Clark, which is a great resource as well. Thanks, Brenda. So on organ donation, so that came through our Board of Science, and our chair of our Board of Science at the moment is Professor Parveen Kumar, and she's phenomenal intellect who runs that side of the house, the Board of Science for us, and our rep in Northern Ireland would be Dr. Paul Dara, so he would represent Northern Ireland in that. And every year the BMA meets in a 4-day conference where we set policy for the next year, and we look at big things. So at the moment, obviously, physician-assisted death would be our big area this year to look at. And over the next few years, we'll have to develop a policy on physician-associated death. In 1999, as you see, the ARM, the annual representative meeting, promoted the issue of organ donation. So we've been at this at BMA for 22 years now, actively lobbying for uptake in organ donation rates, promotion of organ donation register, and then the Board of Science looking at the extensive research and looking at the soft opt-out system for the UK. These things, and I appreciate there are people on the call tonight who are really frustrated at the slow pace of change in this area. It does take time, and we've seen lots of legislation coming through in physician-assisted death, and that will be a very slow process as well. As we know, Wales, Scotland, and England are ahead of us in this, and we'll come to the reasons why. Thanks, Brenda. 90%, so the context, 90% of people in Northern Ireland support organ donation, 48% have signed a register. There are 115 people in the organ donor waiting list, and we had some great success, as we know, in the Belfast Trust in the early part of the pandemic with kidney donation, kidney operations, transplants. Each year with 10 to 15 people die on the organ transplant list, and one donor can save the lives up to 9 others. So the BMA has campaigned for an opt-out system for more than 20 years because we believe it increases donation rates, saves lives, transforms lives, makes it easier for people to donate. Their wish to donate to be respected, encourages people to make a decision, and over time it changes the views within society so that organ donation becomes the social norm. Why change matters: to increase the current rate of consent for organ donation to proceed after a person's death and to increase the overall number of donors. Thank you. So what's been happening? The BMA in Northern Ireland set up a secretariat for an all-party group on organ donation, the mandate, which was 2011-2016. Joanne Dobson, as we know, put forward a private members bill, which wasn't successful, but we continued to lobby. And it was really challenging when the Assembly wasn't operational. In November 2019, shortly after I took up post, I wrote to the Permanent Secretary asking them to progress this. No progress was made because we had no health minister. And it's very difficult to get the civil servants to step outside their normal role and do stuff. They need political cover. So last January, we got Robin Swan, MLA, as our health minister. And Robin Swan, as you've noticed through the pandemic, is really hardworking, really smart, and he works so well at his job. He will be worn out. I see he got his vaccine today, the AstraZeneca vaccine, because he's in that age group of between 45 and 50. So in July 2020, BMA welcomed the Health Minister's announcement of plans to hold a consultation on introducing a soft opt-out system for organ donation in Northern Ireland. So a consultation precedes the bill. Consultation closed last month, and we are trying to influence that the bill goes through as quickly as possible in the current mandate, and that means before the next election. Thank you. So other regions, Northern Ireland is currently the only part of the UK that does not have opt-out legislation. Wales brought in December 15, England May 20, and Scotland will come into effect this month. And does it work? Because there were some concerns, and there were some doctors, a minority, who worried that an opt-out system might decrease the number of donations. So the data shows that introduction of a soft opt-out system for consent in Wales significantly increased organ donation consent. The consent rate increased from 58 to 70.7%, the highest in the UK. Donation rate of 27.1 per million population, the highest in the UK. We're not bad in Northern Ireland, we're about 26, so we would hope that we could improve on that. 6% of the population in Wales opted out, and that's fair enough. That's how you know your system is working, when people opt out. So Evidence of Wales, public awareness and views, public surveys are carried out every 6 months. The data shows very high levels of awareness of legislation, understanding of the legislation and support for the opt-out system. So good high percentages there. You never persuade all the people all the time, but those are good levels. Going forward, it's really important to get the public information campaign right. So hopefully the consultation finishes, we get the bill, and then we need to educate the public to bring them with us so that it's not looking like the medical profession or society is forcing people to do this. We need to be clear about how the new system will work, including the role of the family. And it's key that the family has a say in this. Need to promote the importance of telling your family about your wishes and ensure that the infrastructure and staffing is in place so that an increase in donated organs leads to more transplants and lives saved. That's a slide that says, I'm finished talking, which is a great relief to me and to all of you. And thank you for listening, and I'm happy to answer questions, hopefully easy ones, after we hear the other speakers. Thank you, Emma.
Dr. Black, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us tonight. If anyone has any questions for Dr. Black or for any of the panelists, just stick them in the Q&A box below and we'll get them answered for you. We have a lot of panelists, so we'll definitely get your questions answered tonight. So I think we'll move on now to the presentation by Ryan and Phil, if they're happy enough to go ahead with that.
Yeah, I'm ready to go. Thanks, Emma. And Catherine McKeown from the PHA is going to control our slides for us so that we can try and get through these seamlessly. So thanks for inviting us as well, Emma. It's a pleasure to be here and to speak to all the folks. I'm Ryan Wilson and I work in Secondary Care Directorate in the Department of Health. So our role and the role of my team essentially is to act as policy advisors to the Health Minister. And among our policy responsibilities is everything and all matters related to organ donation and transplantation. So just to give a bit of context to that, that means that we have a very close working relationship with NHS Blood and Transplant, who are represented here on the call as well. NHS BT runs all aspects of organ donation and transplantation across all regions of the UK, and that includes the organ donor register, transplant activity, all of the organ retrieval and transplantation and the promotion of organ donation, and we do that in conjunction with Catherine in the PHA as well. Our role essentially took a new steer from July last year when the Health Minister announced that he wanted to consult the public on a change to legislation. And he said at the time that he felt the time was right to revisit the question of statutory soft opt-out for organ donation. And what he was referring to there was the fact that the Assembly previously considered this question in 2015-16, as Tom had mentioned. The Assembly decided at that time that the time wasn't quite right, or there were some concerns, I suppose, that prevented them from going ahead with Joanne's proposals. What they did decide instead was that we should focus on the promotion of organ donation, getting more people to talk about organ donation and join the register, and that we should revisit the question in 5 years' time as to whether a further change in the law would be necessary to help to promote that further. And that's essentially where we are now, and the Minister has kind of accelerated that process with his announcement in July. So from July, really, we got to work on developing a consultation document to put the question out to the public, which we launched in December, the 11th of December last year. In those intervening years, Tom touched on it as well, that there have been a lot of developments across the other regions. Wales had just gone live with its system. England and Scotland subsequently implemented their opt-out systems. And in each of those countries, I think it's just good to recognise that all of those required a change in the law, a change to the way that the Human Tissue Act is applied in each country, and a change to the codes of practice that medics and nurses need to follow when they have a conversation about organ donation. And then with each of those changes in legislation, there's been quite a long period of public engagement and education and awareness raising, so that all members of the public are aware of what the implications of those changes are, and have a better understanding, because we all know that there's a lot of there has been a lot of misconception out there, and a need for sort of continuous myth busting and awareness raising, which has been ongoing for years. And I think as those changes have taken effect across the different regions of the UK, the public awareness has been seen to gradually increase with that. So we maybe just move on to the next slide there, Catherine, if you can, please. Yep. So what was the consultation for? We were asking the public about our proposals to change the current system of consent. That's from one where you currently have to actively opt into the organ donor register, or state your organ donation decision to a family member or a friend, and to change that to one which we refer to as the statutory soft opt-out framework for consent. And that's one where consent is deemed in most circumstances to be in place unless you have decided otherwise. And just to clarify that we were talking here, this really only applies to deceased organ donation. So the live kidney transplant service that many will be familiar with isn't counted in this. This is really to do with the decision to donate organs after your death. So the next slide, please. Who did we consult with? We ran the consultation for a period of 10 weeks, so from 11th of December up until the 19th of February, just last month. During that time, we had a series of public meetings, all of which we did in this format in Zoom, which was a new thing for us as well, but I think worked quite well and enabled us to engage with quite a wide audience and at different times of the day. So normally we do these events through public meetings, and it's can be hard to get people out over the winter months to come to a public session in that way. So the Zoom format actually worked quite well and quite smoothly. We had a total of 99 attendees over those 8 meetings, and they were a mixture of open public sessions. We had 3 events that were targeted either at young people specifically or at older audiences. And we had an event which was hosted by the British Heart Foundation, which they had invited members of the health committee to. And that one was quite important towards the end of the consultation period, because it wasn't a formal meeting with the health committee, but the health committee will have a really important role to play when the bill comes through the Assembly. They essentially will scrutinise all of the clauses and the aspects that are covered by the bill. That meeting gave us a good sense that by and large they're very supportive of what's being proposed. So we'll come to that in more detail, and what they'll do during that process is invite expert testimony and evidence from a range of experts from across our health system and from further afield, to give their views on how these systems work in other countries and what benefits they might bring to our campaign to increase the consent rate. So that was a positive way to sort of end our public sessions. The consultation, like any policy consultation that we hold in the department here, was open to anyone, and we tried our best to promote that to everyone right across Northern Ireland. So hopefully people will have heard of it and will have taken part in it. We particularly were keen to hear from the clinical community and our trusts, from a lot of charities and other stakeholders. There are quite a wide range of charities in Northern Ireland that represent all of the different clinical specialties. So we've specific kidney charities, heart, lung charities, all of which were interested, and all again were very supportive of this move, in the belief that it will hopefully, like we've seen in Wales recently, push that consent rate up. We also consulted with our local councils and with the community and voluntary sector. So all of those have a different set of interests and different contribution to make to organ donation, and they already do a lot of good work in promoting organ donation. So it was important that we heard from all of them. We had in the end almost 2,000 responses to the consultation from a range of individuals, professional organisations, royal colleges, medical organisations, councils. So it's good to get that cross section of support as well. And we're just in the process now of analysing all of those responses and finalising that for the minister to publish. But by and large, it's been a very positive consultation. The purpose of the consultation, or the questions that we were asking, were to cover a range of important issues, and essentially the proposals align with those the systems that are now in place in Wales and England and in Scotland. So firstly, we asked people what their current organ donation decision is, and whether they're supportive. So that was just to give us a good gauge of the level of knowledge and the level of support from the consultees. We set out a proposed range of exemptions to opt-out legislation. So that would be groups of people to whom deemed consent wouldn't automatically apply, and there are good reasons for some of those. We would cover people who, for example, aren't ordinarily resident in Northern Ireland, or visitors, tourists. But by and large, the proposal is that deemed consent would apply to all people above 18 years of age. We then asked some questions about really just to emphasise that the important role that families play would continue to be recognised, and that's to do with the donation decision and the donation conversation that takes place at the end of life. And some questions then about things like novel and rare transplants and organ donation for research purposes, which, again, for good reasons, we wouldn't want to include within the provisions of this bill, and that faith and beliefs would continue to be respected, and they are currently, but just included that within our consultation, that to assure people that faith and beliefs would obviously continue to be respected in those discussions. And finally, just asked a question of how people felt we should raise awareness. Said once this legislation goes through, if it goes through, we think there needs to be a considerable period of time of public engagement and education. So moving on, please. Why change the system? I'll not labour these too much. I think Tom covered it. I mean, basically what we're aiming at is to address the gap. There's a gap between what we know is the public level of support for organ donation. It's consistently high. It's always around the 90% mark, but that's not always reflected in the rate of people who are on the organ donor register. That's been increasing steadily every year for the last 7 or 8 years. It's not quite as high as 90% when we come to consent rate, and that's really what we want to bring the consent rate up to match as closely as possible to what we know to be the public's high level of support for organ donation. Next one, please, Catherine. So where we are now, we are just finalising our analysis of the public consultation for a report that we'll publish very soon, and we have begun the process alongside that of drafting a bill to go to the Assembly. For those that aren't familiar, I mean, the legislation process can be quite long and drawn out. There's just over a year left of the current Assembly mandate, and our aim is to bring this bill through the various stages of scrutiny and approval by the Assembly within that time period. And we wouldn't have started the journey had we not believed that to be possible. So there are numerous steps in this where the bill will go to the Assembly. It'll go through the Health Committee a couple of times, where they will have the right to make changes and to as I say, bring expert witnesses to talk about it. So we need to allow some time for that. We're in the process of just adding that into the Assembly's remaining timetable within this mandate, with the aim of a bill being finalised around about this time next year. Thereafter, there'll be an implementation period, and that means getting all the systems and processes in place and changing the codes of practice. And during that time, we'll do the in-depth public information campaigns as well. So all of that, there's a lot of work to do, but I think it's important to recognise that a lot has been done, and the wheels are firmly in motion now. And I think all of what's ahead of us is really achievable, and just ask people to continue to support it as much as we can. Have we another slide? Yeah, so at this point, I'm just going to hand over to Phil Walton from NHS Blood and Transplant, and Phil's going to describe a little bit about how the current systems work and what the proposed changes are.
Thanks, Ryan. So first of all, just just to introduce my background, really, I'm a nurse by trade. I've worked in organ donation, so for NHS Blood and Transplant now for close to 12 years, as a specialist nurse for organ donation initially. So I would be at the very sharp end of organ and tissue donation, speaking to families in their time of bereavement and facilitating organ donation. But within my time in NHS Blood and Transplant, I've also had the wonderful opportunity of having and supporting opt-out legislation through the different countries as they've developed. So I live and work in Wales. So I've lived through the whole process and supported the Welsh Government through their legislation change back in 2015. And then supported more recently with England and Scotland as they've gone live, and of course now with Guernsey, Isle of Man, and Northern Ireland supporting that. So this part of my presentation is going to kind of talk about what the system is currently, and then compare that to how that will look under an opt-out system. And I think it's important just to kind of focus in on those a little bit. I'm only really going to talk about opt-in and opt-out systems. I appreciate there are other systems out there in the world like reciprocity and mandated choice, but that's not really part of this presentation, and it's a whole debate in it on its own. So the current system for Northern Ireland, they work in an opt-out system, and that's historically what we've done across the British Isles until 2015 when Wales changed. And opting in really puts the onus about organ donation and decision making on the individual to take an active role to action their decision. So you can opt in by signing the organ donor register, and that can be done in many different ways. You've got your organ donation or organ donor register website that you can go onto. You can do it through a Boots Advantage card. You can do it as you apply for a new driving license with a DVA. So there are many partner feeds that feed into the organ donor register, or you can tell your friends or family that it's something that you want to do, that you'd like to be a donor, and that carries equal weight, whether you've told family or whether you've signed on the register. They carry equal legal weight. You'll hear this a few times through this presentation, and Ryan has already said it once or twice as well, but we can't emphasize enough that in the current system and in a proposed new system, the families are central to donation conversations. Their views and their knowledge of the individual are always taken into account, and they are brought into those conversations. So next slide, Catherine. So under proposed opt-out system, unless you have recorded a decision not to donate, so you have opted out, or you're in an excluded group, which Ryan has just kind of given you an overview of what those proposed groups might be, it will be considered that you agree or you are willing to be an organ donor when you die. So the onus of decision making moves away to, if you really, really don't want to be a donor, go and do something about it, as opposed to if you really, really do want to be a donor, go and do something about it. So the default setting really has changed. As I've said already, the families will always be consulted. Faiths and beliefs are an important factor in end-of-life processes. So there are many faiths, many belief systems where end-of-life traditions and rituals need to be observed. And there is a myth that organ donation means that that can't happen, and it really is a myth. So part of this opportunity to engage with the general public and around a proposed law change means that we can actually address those myths head on and say, whatever your faith, whatever your beliefs, we will always respect that. And we will see about how we can make organ donation go ahead in line with those faiths and beliefs. But more than anything else, organ donation under proposed opt-out system continues to be your choice. There is no state ownership of organs or tissues. It's up to you what you want to do. And if you object to being a donor, you can do something about that. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So we've touched on this so I don't need to labour on this too long really, other than to say that there is a movement across the British Isles and the Crown dependencies that make up the United Kingdom. Scotland went live on Friday last week, and they've already had two deemed authorisations. So they've hit the ground running, which is very positive to hear. We're supporting Isle of Man and Guernsey, who we hope will come into effect this year, and Northern Ireland, hopefully if we can meet the mandate by May 2020, then we will be implementing going live sometime after that, after the public marketing campaign. So let's talk through some key donation figures. And again, Dr. Black has talked on some of these. So organ donation is, of course, the gift of life to someone who is in need of a transplant. I think the forgotten other within organ donation is tissue donation as well, and tissue donation has the potential to save many lives, whether that's giving back the gift of sight, or it is providing somebody with a skin graft who's had a terrible burn or something like that. These can't be downplayed in just because they're tissues. So I think it's often forgotten, and we myself need to do better to raise the profile of that. You can, of course, donate organs through the living donor scheme. So most commonly that's through kidney donation, but we can also donate livers or half of a liver through living donation. But of course, as Ryan has said, the proposed opt-out system only focuses on deceased donation. And anyone can register to become an organ donor after their death, and there is no age limit to that registration. So next slide. So I think we've got two videos back to back that will just talk about the importance of organ donation.
Receiving my heart transplant gave my old life back. I'd like to thank my donor and their family. Please, sign the register, share your decision.
Being given a second chance is so precious, and I make the most of it every day. Sign the register, share your decision.
Organ donation saved Sophie's life, and we're forever grateful. Sign the register, share your decision.
Seven patients in Northern Ireland died waiting on a transplant. Sign the register, share your decision.
There are 115 people in Northern Ireland waiting for an organ transplant. Please sign the register, share your decision.
Most people in Northern Ireland would accept an organ if they needed one. So please sign the register, share your decision.
But less than half of us have signed the organ donor register. Please, sign the register, share your decision.
You can save or transform the lives of up to 9 people through organ donation. Please, sign the register, share your decision.
Only a half of families agree to organ donation if they don't know the wishes of their loved one. Please, sign the register, share your decision.
But this rises to 9 out of 10 if the families know their loved one's wishes. Please sign the register, share your decision.
Thanks, Catherine. So as the videos have just said, there are more than 100 people in Northern Ireland waiting for an organ transplant. And we know that somewhere between 10 and 15 die awaiting an organ transplant, which is really very tragic, given that, you know, if we were able to push the consent rate up for organ donation, then we could see a dramatic drop in those numbers of people that die waiting for a transplant. At the bottom there, we know that one organ donor could save up to 9 lives. We know that that isn't 9 is kind of the maximum. That doesn't always happen. I think that, you know, we need to pitch this with some reality, but there is the potential in some cases where 9 lives can be saved from one donor, which I think is an important thing to highlight. We'll move on to the next one. So the consent rate for Northern Ireland is 64%, and within NHS Blood and Transplant and across the UK, what we see when we benchmark ourselves internationally is that a world-class consent rate by those countries who exceed or excel in organ donation and transplantation is an 80% consent rate. That's what we're always going to aspire to get to. And Northern Ireland, like many other countries in the UK, have increased their donation rates without necessarily pushing the needle up on the consent rates, and it's hoped that the introduction of an opt-out system might do that. Now, we've heard from the videos that if the families of the deceased don't know their loved one's decision, really you can flip a coin about whether they're going to give consent or not. And, you know, as a specialist nurse when I was talking to families, there's nothing really that much more distressing to watch than a family agonizing over the right thing to do because they never discussed organ donation with their loved one and they don't know what the safest option to do. And I think when we live in a society where the safe bet is not to donate because, you know, you've never discussed it, you can understand why it falls to 50%. What we've seen from Wales and England is where families don't know the decision of their deceased, and you're working under a deemed consent legislation, that rises up to 70%. And where a family have had a discussion, it's above 90%. So there are some real benefits that come out of a proposed law change. We move on to the next slide, please. So this inverted funnel is really, really very busy. But the highlights really for this is within the blue funnel, we've distilling down the UK population through to the number of actual donors at the bottom there, and then working up on the transplants beyond that. There are approximately 620,000 deaths in the UK every year, and only 1% of those will die in circumstances where donation might be possible. So let's just say that again. 1% of 600,000 people who die in circumstances where donation is possible. They have to die in an intensive care unit. They are ordinarily on a life support machine or a ventilator. And most often they have had a neurological injury that has caused them to die. The numbers beside that are kind of the corresponding Northern Ireland figures, which tell very much the same story, that it is that infrequent an occurrence from the number of deaths that happen to the number of donors that go ahead. So when we talk about every organ donation not missing opportunities for donation to happen, we really do mean it, because it is so infrequent. If we move on to the next slide. So let's talk about what we mean about consent. So consent, first and foremost, is for the individual, the person who has died or is going to die, has given permission for their organs to be used after they've died through transplantation. And that permission can come in the form of the organ donor register or through a verbal expression that the family can relay to you. If the family have never discussed it, then under the current system, we would ask the family for their permission, and where deemed consent would apply in a future state, we would understand whether there was any unwillingness for that person to be a donor. So in cases where donation is possible, and again, I'll just check this for you, we'll say this again, the families are always consulted, even in a deemed consent scenario. And obviously consent is a decision of the deceased and not the state. I think we've got one more video before we move into some kind of detail around how deemed consent might work. I'm afraid I don't have sound, Catherine.
Sorry, let me try that again. Can you hear that now?
Granting the wishes of our loved ones and knowing that they have brings great comfort. Please sign the register. Share your decision. It gives us comfort and peace to know that our decision for Abby has helped save other lives. Please sign the register. Share your decision.
Okay, so for these final couple of slides, I'm really going to zoom into what the organ donation process looks like and how that might look in a deemed consent state. So what you've got on the slide in front of you, I'm going to talk through and give an overview, but this is the organ donation process from start to finish. Now, those top 3 boxes are what we recognize as being part of the organ donation process. They absolutely are part of the process, but they are completely independent from any organ donation or transplantation team. So what happens here is that we've got a patient who has developed a medical emergency, which has brought them into hospital, and they've made their way to the intensive care unit. They will have been brought to the intensive care unit for one of 3 reasons, or all 3 indeed. It will be for treatment, it will be for observation, or they'll be developing a prognosis. So what is the likely outcome for this potential, or for this patient? Beyond that, and for those patients who sadly go on to die, a decision to continue treatment or to conduct brainstem death tests will be made by the treating clinician. And I'll just repeat, this is completely independent of the organ donation or transplantation teams. Once a treating consultant on an intensive care unit has made a decision that ongoing treatment is not in the best interests of that patient and that they are going to die, they will make a referral to the organ donation team, who will mobilize. So the specialist nurse will mobilize and travel to that hospital. We do have specialist nurses across the country, and sometimes they might be embedded in that hospital, but in other cases they may have to travel. When they get there, they'll make an on-site assessment, and that assessment is really looking for reasons why organ donation might not be able to go ahead. So an active cancer would be one reason, COVID-19 would be another, and there are a number of other kind of medical conditions where organ donation just can't be progressed because it's too risky to transplant. So the specialist nurse will be looking for those signs first of all. At that point, we'll start planning conversations. So the specialist nurse alongside the critical care nurse and the intensive care consultant will plan how they are going to talk to the family about the prognosis, the outcome, and the futility of the situation. That plan will involve who's going to say what, how they're going to broach the subject, and how they are going to bring organ donation into that conversation, if indeed they are during that first part of the conversation. So the breaking bad news happens, and the family are told that their loved one is sadly not going to survive their admission to the intensive care unit. And then at some point, they will sensitively bridge into organ donation, normally talking about have they ever discussed about end-of-life preferences, wishes, decisions, anything like that, and then the conversation will develop from there. At that point, there will be one of 2 directions that we'll take. The family will say that organ donation is not something that they want to progress, or it's something that they want to explore. Where organ donation is not progressed, then the end-of-life pathway will be instigated, and the patient will, be entered onto that, and they will go through a kind of a supported and dignified death. If they go down the organ donation route, they will of course be supported to a pain-free and dignified death, but there is all this other stuff that comes after it. So there'll be donor characterization and optimization. So this is about building a profile of the potential donor, everything from their past medical history, their social behavioral history, where they've been on holiday, have they had operations in the past, those sorts of things. And once we've built a really good profile, including blood groups and tissue matches and all those sorts of things, we will share that information with transplant centres, who will know who's on their transplant waiting list, and will be able to match what we refer to as an organ offer, to their potential recipients. From there, once we've got organs accepted, the surgical team, which won't necessarily be based in Northern Ireland, will travel from where they're based and come to the hospital in Northern Ireland to perform the organ donation operation. So they have to travel, there'll be a preparation for theatre, there'll be a handover, making sure everybody knows what they're there for. The organ retrieval or the organ donation operation will happen, and then we'll move into the post-operative care, which will include kind of faith and beliefs, traditions and rituals to support that. Now, within that entire process, which I have to say can take anything between 12 and 48 hours, so it's not a quick process, we have to say that. Within that entire process, only one aspect of that process is affected by a potential opt-out system, and that's the donation conversation. And we have some arrows. So I think it's important to say that although it is a good change, it's a big change that opt-out legislation is proposed and would be on the way, only one aspect of that entire process is changed, and I think that's important to remember. If we zoom in a little bit further into the donation conversation, so the thing that really is changing under a opt-out system, there isn't a great deal that changes within that either. So in step one, which in grey, it means it's no change. There is a referral to the Northern Ireland organ donation team and plan the donation discussion with the family. Once we're talking to the family, we hit step two, and we're talking about organ donation, and we'll establish from that family if there is an express decision in place. That means, has the individual who has died or is dying told anybody that they want to be a donor, either through the organ donor register, or they've made it clear verbally that that's something that they want to do. So that's great. If that's a yes, then we'll go down that pathway, and that will be consent from the individual. If there isn't an express decision in place, we will move to deemed consent and see whether that can apply. So this is new under a new system. So we'll establish whether deemed consent will apply, and that will seek to establish where there is no known decision from the person who is dying, and they're not in an excluded group. Now, Ryan talked about excluded groups, which are yet to be decided, but for England and Wales, what we have there, just to give you a flavour, is that you've got to be over 18, you've got to have lived in England or Wales for more than 12 months, so you're ordinarily resident, and you also have to have understood and had the mental capacity to understand the legislation as it affects you in the time prior to your death. If you don't fulfill those, then deemed consent cannot apply to you. And these are an important safeguard because we do need to protect the vulnerable in our society. We can't assume everybody wants to be a donor and has had the opportunity to take action around that. So where deemed consent cannot apply, so they're under 18 or they've only just moved to Northern Ireland, step 4 is no change. And we will take consent from the family if that's something that they want to do. So if we move to the next slide. So in summary, organ donation remains your decision. You can opt in, opt out, amend, withdraw, or even nominate a representative on the organ donor register. So signifying your decision and what you want to happen. So whatever you decide, just make sure that those close to you know. And as I have relayed, the anguish that a family go through if they don't know their loved one's decision can be spared if you've had that conversation. And I think that's my last slide.
And we just have one last video to finish off with as well.
We lost Mummy very suddenly at 56. We hadn't had the conversation, which made it much more difficult for us as a family when the time arose. However, we've since found great comfort knowing that Mummy's organs have given others the gift of life. Please, sign the register. Share your decision.
That's us.
Lovely. Ryan and Phil, thank you so much for that presentation. That was brilliant. And Catherine, thank you as well for sharing the slides. That made our life a lot easier. So if Amy is ready, we will move on to her bit. Amy, are you there? Yep.
Yeah, ready.
So Amy, I'll let you introduce yourself because you'll do a lot better than me. So go ahead if you want to start now.
So hi, I'm Amy Duncan, and I basically am a uni student still at the minute, doing veterinary in Nottingham. And basically I'm here to speak on behalf of my family, because we're all very passionate about organ donation and have experienced kind of firsthand the challenges that are faced when you're waiting for a transplant. So basically, my dad, Andrew, he was diagnosed at 23 with dilated cardiomyopathy. And that basically is a disease of the heart muscle that causes hypertrophy and thinning of the wall. So it can't efficiently pump the blood around the body. And due to this, he developed heart failure. And then after the heart failure, he also developed kidney failure due to the kind of lack of perfusion whenever the blood flow was affected. And of course, these came with a multitude of symptoms, from fluid retention to exercise intolerance, shortness of breath, among all the others. And obviously this made daily life quite hard. It also meant that he would eventually need a heart and kidney transplant in order to survive. So basically, my dad had his first transplant assessment at age 23, and then another in 2011. He was able to cope between these times with kind of the help of medications and seeing his cardiologists regularly, but he wasn't really able to do things with us as children, just like the normal things that you want your parents to do with you. Like, he couldn't play football with my big brother, he couldn't take us to the park or whatever. And then after his transplant assessment in 2011, he was put on the transplant list. And he got one call while he was on it. Basically, it was at Easter of 2012. And he got the call, went to Newcastle, and it ended up not being viable, which is a really, really sad thing to happen whenever you get yourself hyped up for getting your transplant, going to get better, and it ends up falling through. So we kind of have seen that side of it as well. Then after the call at Easter, he ended up being put on the urgent transplant list in July 2012 and was rushed to Newcastle Hospital. And it ended up that he got an LVAD fitted, which is basically, it's a left ventricular assist device that is used when the heart literally can't pump blood around the body anymore. And because of that, he ended up having to take warfarin and heparin and a lot of other blood thinners. And this did lead to a lot of complications for him, with coagulation. And he ended up he had a brain hemorrhage because of this, because his blood was too thin, on Boxing Day of 2012. whenever he was back home for Christmas. So again, back over Newcastle, and both him and my mum were over there for about a year in total, with myself and my brother living here in Northern Ireland, just kind of going between relatives' houses. So eventually he came home for good in July 2013 with his LVAD. And he was kind of on and off the transplant list this whole time because he was having problems with clotting, wasn't doing good, and would go through complications and things. But eventually, in September 2014, he had a stroke, sepsis and pneumonia. And obviously these led to massive complications and were a lot for his body to deal with. And he ended up passing away on the 16th of November in 2014, age 38. So basically I was 15 and my brother Robbie was 12 at this stage. And it was quite hard for us to see, purely because he was our dad, he was our best friend, but also because there's a familial nature to the disease. So basically both myself and my brother have the gene for dilated cardiomyopathy. So that means that there's a 50% chance that both of us could end up needing a heart transplant in the future. Obviously there's no other, once you go into heart failure, there's no other option other than a heart transplant. So it is kind of a fear of mine that has always been there in the back of my mind. So obviously I don't want my mum to go through this with us the same way she did with my dad. And then one consequence of being a child of someone waiting on a heart transplant, or any transplant in general, is knowing quite a bit about the process. And it does make it a bit scarier for me, I'm not gonna lie, whenever I think about the chance of me needing a transplant in the future. But because of this, I personally very, very passionate about the topic of organ donation and education to the public about why it's so important. And I also think that the change in the law to bring in a soft opt-out system would be hugely beneficial, and increase the numbers of organ donations. And of course, this would save so many more lives. And the thing as well, it's my dad actually campaigned for this whenever he was alive, back in 2014, whenever it was last brought to the Assembly. And he made a video with British Heart Foundation Northern Ireland, and they shot it in our back garden. So basically, it's the thing that stands out to me most is that he was so passionate about it and educating others, and advocating for organ donation, and trying to raise awareness and get as many people to sign the organ donor register. So that's basically what I kind of want to continue in his legacy. And he was always the person that wanted to raise awareness and help others and make sure people knew about the practicalities of joining the organ donor register and what they can do to tell their families and make sure that everyone knows their wishes. And yeah, this was very, very close to his heart. So that's the main reason that I'm so passionate about it, and obviously my brother and my mum is as well. And we've done a lot of kind of helping the BHF to kind of raise awareness and do fundraising and things. Like when my dad was alive, we did a walk that he walked the Peace Bridge and the Craigavon Bridge in Derry, in a bright red tracksuit with a red wig on his head, basically trying to raise as much money as possible, and do everything that he could. So yeah, basically I think that's about me. I think that's about it, if that's okay.
Amy, that was brilliant. Thank you so much. Honestly, I can't even explain to you how much we appreciate you coming and talking about this tonight. Obviously it's not easy. It's a very personal thing for you and for your family. And you're such a credit to your dad for everything you're doing, advocating for organ donation. You're just brilliant. We all think you're fantastic. So thank you so
Thanks very much. I love coming and speaking to people and letting people know kind of all about his story. So
Well, you're
thanks for
brilliant at
inviting
it.
me.
So keep going. You're fantastic. And if anyone has any questions for Amy, please stick them in the Q&A. As you heard, she's lovely. She can answer any of your questions. So please just stick it in the Q&A box. Thank you, Amy. So now, if it's okay, we will move on to Marcin, if he is happy enough to talk now. Marcin is Dahi's daddy. If you have seen the Donate for Dahi page on Twitter, Facebook, you'll be familiar with who he is. If Marcin, you can share your, or you can just know you're just talking, aren't you? So if you want to
Yeah. I don't have any PowerPoints or anything like that. So
no, that's fine. Don't worry. Go you ahead.
Also, just hi everyone. Absolutely delighted to be speaking to you all this evening. And to be honest, I just feel so humbled to be given the opportunity, really. So yes, I'm Marcin McGowan, and I just want to share with you my own experiences with my son. What life on the waiting list is like for us as a family, and speak a little about the campaign that we run. So yes, so Dahi's story is that he was born on the 21st of October in 2016. And looking at Dahi, it's sometimes hard to tell that he has an underlying condition, because he really resembles any other 4-year-old. He loves boxing, he loves football, he loves wrestling, and generally anything really that involves messing about. And he's just really the most outgoing wee boy. And to be honest, I feel very blessed to call him my son. The beginning of our story really is at Seth's 20-week scan, and that's where we found out that there was a significant problem with Dahi's heart. But no appointment after that really could have prepared us for what lay ahead. Dahi was born with a condition called hypoplastic left heart syndrome, and he had his first open heart surgery at just 4 days old. Hypoplastic left heart syndrome is basically a condition where you basically have half a working heart. So 50 days would really pass. I could talk for hours and hours in those 50 days, but 50 days passed with countless other heart surgeries. There was a sepsis, there was a stroke, there was life-saving ECMO. He had a nasty neck infection, and he was given just a 10% chance of survival. All before we got Dahi back to Belfast. So more surgery would take place really in the coming months, but it was nowhere near the rocky road at when he had begun his life. And after around 6 months, normality would enter our lives for the first time. And it would last for almost a year. So we found ourselves basically at home, and we were waiting on a call for the next stage operation, and that's a call that would never come. Our lives changed forever again in January 2018 then. We were back in Evelina in London, and what we thought was a routine scan, it showed that Dahi had a moderate to severe regurgitation in his tricuspid valve, meaning he would be no longer a candidate for his 3rd stage Fontan surgery. And that left a heart transplant as his only option at that stage in January 2018. So Dahi wasn't officially listed on the routine list until June 2018. So we had a gap of a few months there where it was just kind of unknown. But in those months between January and June, I took it upon myself and I educated myself on what organ donation is, where we were as a society, looking at stats, facts, and figures. And basically, I read every report that you could possibly read. On transplant activity reports and for years basically, and what we could do in the statistics and all that. And from that, Seth and I decided that we would start an awareness campaign for organ donation in the hope that people would consider joining the organ donor register. and to share their organ donation decision as well with their loved ones. The Donate for Dahi campaign, it was intended totally to be a local campaign in our native West Belfast. However, the campaign, it just grew, and now we have reached people and connected with people all over the world. And that may be thanks to a certain Paddy Barnes when Dahi fought him in the Ulster Hall that time. So, you know, as I look back to kind of 2016, I remember being disappointed. This was before Dahi was born. That Joanne Dobson's bill for soft opt-out organ donation didn't go through. You know, I can recall being supportive at the time, but I didn't really have any information on what the information that I have now, really. And kind of, you know, seeing Joanne and the likes of Joe Brawley and Shane Finnegan and even Amy's dad, you know, in the media, and they were making this noise around, you know, the question of organ donation. So we were kind of aware of that, and you know, our campaign, with the help of the likes of the British Heart Foundation, NI, and the likes of families, you know, like Amy's, and you know, the British Medical Association, you know, I think we've all been very successfully campaigning, for a change of law here. So one of the main aims of our campaign, you know, is to normalise the talk around organ donation in our society, and we truly believe that changing the law here would be kind of a step in the right direction. It won't be the way of a magic wand. You know, all our problems aren't going to be fixed, but it will most certainly benefit those awaiting the gift of life. And you know, we do believe that it will be a step in the right direction. The way I look at it as well is it can't really, you know, be a coincidence that 9 out of the top 10 countries in the world with the highest rates of consent, that they have a soft opt-out system in place. And if we look kind of closer to home, if we look at Wales, and I know Dr. Black has mentioned as well, you know, that you know, I've read a few reports that some people may suggest that it's too early to tell with Wales, but it can't also be a coincidence, in my opinion, that they now have the highest rate of consent in the UK, and I think it was as high as 77% a year or two ago. And the reason that statistic, that they're now the highest, is even more impressive to me, is that at the time they were the lowest before the bill was introduced in the UK. There was all these initial concerns as well, you know, with that there will be mass opt-outs here, or you know, but fortunately that didn't happen. And even when in England, when England introduced Max and Kira's law, there was no kind of mass opt-outs. You know, people of course will opt out, but that's why the system is there. You know, our Donate for Dahi campaign, we had a huge decision to make when starting the campaign to soft opt-out, you know, because we were told, you know, we have a very good relationship with the Public Health Agency and with, you know, the Department of Health, and you know, we've had countless meetings with, you know, Ryan and Catherine and you know, and anybody really in those offices. However, you know, we were told that any mention of soft opt-out in our campaign, that it couldn't be supported, because, and the way I can kind of I can smile about this now, really, but the way that I can think of that really is if it could make a reference to Harry Potter, and it was as if mentioning Lord Voldemort's name, it just wasn't done, or it was frowned upon. But you know, and that's not, you know, that's not an attack on the, you know, on anybody or on the PHA or the Department of Health, because we have a fantastic relationship, and you know, these organizations and stuff, they are kind of bound by policies, and you know, and that's just the way it is. We understood that, but you know, nowadays, you know, with Catherine, who was speaking earlier, you know, she's done absolutely amazing work since in a very short time, and you know, there isn't a day that goes by or a week that goes by where we aren't in touch, and kind of, you know, the work that is being done there is, I'm really excited about that work, and you know, working with Catherine and co kind of in the future as well. But back to soft opt-out, you know, it was a difficult decision, but we went ahead with our lobbying for soft opt-out, because we thought it was the right thing to do. The biggest problem at the time was that we didn't have a government in place. Therefore, we started with local government, and we started with our own council and Belfast City Council. a few months later and late night travel, we had 11 councils passing a motion in support of the introduction of soft opt-out. So the thing is, councils don't have the power to change the law, but that they give us the opportunity then to assess how the political parties were feeling about this. For example, the DUP, they voted against in Belfast and in a few other councils. But to be honest, I was so glad that happened, because it allowed us to meet with their spokesperson at the time for health, it was MLA Paula Bradley, and that helped us build a positive relationship with the party to outline, why we thought that they should agree with it. So this kind of this lobbying, it gave us the confidence then to write to the Permanent Secretary in November 2019, encouraging soft opt-out to be introduced. So we had accompanying letters from the British Heart Foundation, NI, and from Dr. Tom Black as well. So we met with every party leader who also signed accompanying letters supporting our cause. So this was in November 2018, but I have to say that we were disappointed with Mr. Pengelly's response. However, we wouldn't have to wait too long for a government and a Minister of Health to be in place a few months later. At that stage, we felt that we covered kind of a good bit of groundwork at that stage, and instead of kind of starting over when the health when the government sat again, we felt that we could basically hit the ground running in January 2020 when Stormont sat again. And we had the pleasure really of being one of the first meetings with the newly established health committee. So we met with the chair and deputy chair, Colin Gildernew and Pam Cameron, and we have continued to build on that relationship since. We were absolutely delighted when Minister Swan announced that there would be a consultation for soft opt-out organ donation, and I have to say it was a very proud day for us as a family when asked to help launch the consultation. With Minister Swan, it was it's kind of with all the hard work we were doing, it was I would be lying if I said that I wasn't proud. But as well as that, we're so proud to play our part with others, from a lot of them tonight in the rise of people joining the organ donor register. When we started our campaign, it was at 42%, and now it's actually at 49%. So in the past 2 weeks, the NHS organ donation have shared their third quarter, and it's now up to 49%. So we're almost at the stage now where registered organ donors will no longer be in the minority of our society, because that number is going up. So basically, like there's no right or wrong way to deal with the news that your child's only and last hope is to receive a donated organ. Every single case is different. Every family are different. They handle the news differently. And basically, I've had people ask me at times, why we put so much energy into the campaign. And the answer to me, it's quite simple for me. And it all starts back on the 21st of October in 2016, when Dahi was born. So when Dahi was born, I felt a love that I've never, ever felt before. And I can't really put it into words and describe exactly how that love feels, but it's there. And the best way to try and describe it, it's you would do anything to keep your child safe and protected. In my situation, as much as I want to, I cannot protect my son. I don't know for sure what lies ahead. And I can't give Dahi exactly what he needs. So what I can do though, is spend every single day, every hour of every day, every week of my life promoting organ donation, in the hope the more people say, yes, I donate. And if there's more people supporting organ donation and saying, yes, I donate, then many other people have more of a chance of receiving their gift of life, their second chance. And that also means that Dahi has a better chance. So that's me basically.
Martin, thank you so much. That was such a lovely talk, actually. That was lovely. I think we can really see from our stories tonight how how organ donation is so important to families on a personal level. I mean, it's not very often when we do hear about legislation on the news and things, but you don't really hear much from families personally. But you are doing an amazing job. Your campaign is amazing. And we really, really hope that Dahi does get his organ that he needs. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for talking to us.
Really appreciate it.
You're
Cheers.
fantastic. So I think now we will move on to our Q&A, and if you have any questions for Marcin particularly, please put them in the Q&A box and I'm sure he'll be very happy to answer those for you. So the panelists that we're going to have tonight, we've got all our speakers who have spoken tonight. You can ask any of them a question and I'm sure they'll be happy to answer. And we've also got a few extra people here as well. We've got an expert panel who will definitely be able to answer anything that you ask. So we've also got Claire Willimont joining us. She is the Accountable Executive from the Legislation Implementation Programme. And we've got Monica Hackett, who is the Regional Manager for the NI Organ Donation Services team. Then we've got Heather Savage, and Heather is a specialist nurse in organ donation. We've Dominic Trainer, who is the Regional Clinical Lead for Organ Donation as well. And then we've all our other speakers from this evening. So please just put your questions into the Q&A and we'll get those answered for you. So I will just thank our speakers again so much and hand over to Victoria, who will lead our Q&A session.
Yes, and thank you so much to those speakers again. We do have quite a number of questions that have come through already, and also some lovely comments for some of our speakers. So speakers, do go and take a look in the question box. I'll try to get through as many questions as I can, but I'm aware that time is pushing on. So if we don't answer your question, please send us an email and we'll try to get someone to answer your question for you after tonight. I'm going to start with a question. It's one of the more recent ones, directed to Amy, but if anyone else wants to chip in, please do. And it says, Amy, you and your siblings were in school through much of those years. What do you think can help children and young people understand and champion the importance of organ donation?
Yeah, so myself and my brother were in school the whole time that my dad was sick. So basically, I think personally that it's a lot about kind of teaching them from when they're young, making it normal, making sure that there's no stigma around kind of organ donation, and making sure that they understand that it is a gift that you're giving to someone else. Like us as children, we knew a lot about it, obviously, because our dad was sick our whole lives, basically. And even my friends and our other family members that were children at the time, we all have a lot of understanding about it. And I definitely think that that is the main thing, to kind of make sure that children get why this is happening, and make sure that they understand that this is necessary for so many people to live and enjoy their lives and have a good quality of life. And I also think as well that it's something that needs to be kind of, obviously it isn't really talked about much in schools, I don't think. So I feel like this is kind of one of the things that should be talked about, kind of like how CPR is taught in school now. That was never taught whenever I was at school, well, when I was a child anyway, but now it's kind of BHF in particular has been kind of campaigning to get CPR taught in schools, and I think that talking about organ donation is just a really important part of teaching children about society in general, and the needs of society when it comes to health matters and things like that. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Amy. Marcin, I don't know if you maybe want to chip in on that question as well, with a slightly different perspective of having a child who needs an organ donation and explaining that to him.
Yeah, well, to be honest, we're very open with Dahi. He's just fallen asleep actually, so I'm sorry you can't see him on screen, but if Dahi knows that he needs a new heart. His friends in nursery knows that he needs a new heart. I'm a school teacher as well, so I'm a secondary school teacher, and I would agree with a lot of things that Amy has said there. And I'm also working with a crowd of other teachers, and Catherine from the Public Health Agency is steering that group really. We are working on kind of, you know, where to go, where we're going with education. But what I can say, in my experience, I've been invited into a lot of schools. We have spoken to as young as nursery to seniors in secondary school, and you know, I'm happy to say that I'm very I'm very hopeful for the future. Our young people are absolutely amazing, and the only way that the best way I could describe it, is that they just seem to get it. You know, it's not the elephant in the room, or it's not, you know, it doesn't seem to be as an awkward conversation. I've had, you know, a lot more awkward conversations with people the same age and older than I am than I have with children, to be honest. So all I can say on that is that I'm very hopeful for the future with the conversations that I've had for young people, and that, again, you know, I'm not saying there's a right way or a wrong way to do things, especially with such a young child like Dahi, but we are very open with him, and you know, of course we protect him, but he knows exactly what he needs.
Thank you so much. Does anyone else want to pop in on that question before we move on? Please raise your hand if you do, so I can see. No, I think we'll move on then. We have a question here from Maeve, who says, I was just wondering if COVID would have had any impact on those waiting for transplantation, and how many people on the register will actually receive a donation. Does anyone want to jump in with that? I'm sure we all know there's been a huge impact on the entire health service because of COVID, but particular to transplantation. Martin, do you want to go ahead? I see you've raised your hand there.
Yeah, again, you know, I don't have a medical background. However, I can tell you how it has affected us, you know, as a family waiting. We are under the Freeman Hospital in Newcastle, and we are supposed to go for transplant review every 6 months. It's approaching. It'll be 2 years in October since the last time we've been reviewed. We were due a review last March, and of course, COVID, that's when the lockdown came. So we haven't been seen in over a year and a half, really. And what that means for us is that, you know, we do keep in contact, but it's, you know, it's really difficult because we really don't know what's going on. And we do know that pediatric heart transplants, there's actually been an increase in pediatric heart transplants in the last in the last year. I think there's been more this year than there has been last year. However, what we are being told by our transplant center is that only the most urgent cases are going ahead. But if you look at the transplant activity report, and you know, you will see that a lot of the other organs, there has been, you know, there's been a decrease in, and I'm sorry for speaking on behalf of, you know, people who actually work for the organizations, but you know, you'll see that there has been a decrease in organs, but the hearts seem to be, you know, on the same lane as last year. But I'll let somebody else who knows what they're talking about come in.
Yeah, thank you so much. I see Dominic has raised his hand first. Claire, we'll come to you in just a minute if that's okay.
Hello, my name's Dominic Traynor. I'm a consultant intensive care physician in the Royal Victoria Hospital and the clinical lead for organ donation for Northern Ireland at the minute. And you're right, Marcin. So with reference to COVID and transplantation, initially back in March, April last year, a lot of the transplant centres closed down and certainly reduced activity. And it was only the most urgent cases, certainly like liver transplants, heart transplants, it was those at the very top of the list that got done. And there was a number of reasons for that. I mean, a lot of intensive care units were at full capacity, and we were ventilating patients on wards that weren't usually intensive care units. So part of the problem was that the potential transplant recipients weren't able to get their post-operative intensive care bed, an access issue, if you like. And then secondly, there was concern obviously around COVID, transplanting organs, and then giving those recipients immunosuppressant therapy, etc., in that sort of context. On the donor side, which I'm primarily concerned with, obviously Phil had said during his presentation that if a patient died in an intensive care unit and they were COVID positive, that excluded them from donating because of concerns around passing that on to recipients, etc. But we've been absolutely amazed at how deceased donation has continued within the hospitals in Northern Ireland throughout the COVID pandemic, really. Certainly in those intensive care units where patients died who weren't COVID positive, we, again, Phil had outlined the process that we all follow in our hospitals with regard to approaching families for donation, and we found actually that over the last year our consent rate has gone up, with families more willing to consider donation than they were in years gone by. And maybe there's probably multiple reasons for that as well, but our last consent rate for year to date is 78% in the last year, and that's something that has taken us a little bit by surprise, but it really emphasised to us and the team the strong framework and foundations that we have been able to implement over the last 10 or 12 years, really since 2008, and that organ donation task force recommendations were put into place. And what that said to me was, during the time when our intensive care units in the north here were under extreme pressure, the approach to families and the process that was followed continued, and more families than we were anticipating actually said yes to organ donation, and that's quite interesting. And so I think really, in summary, I feel that with regard to timing of this legislation, etc., the foundations we have for deceased donation are very, very strong here in Northern Ireland. We know from our living transplant rates that we have a very altruistic population here, and so I think that, whereas 5 years ago we were a bit reticent about it, perhaps the time now is right for a bit of a push, So sorry, I stopped talking. I just thought I'd chip in.
No, thank you so much, Dominic. Claire, do you still have something to add to that? Go on ahead.
No, couldn't have said it any better at all myself. So no, answered, nothing further to add from what Dominic just said.
Thank you so much, and thank you to Maeve for that question. We have a question here from an anonymous attendee. They're showing their support for the soft opt-out organ donation system, but have concerns about whether our health system will have the capacity to be able to cope if the number of donations increase, with regards to specialist trained staff, theatre space, beds, etc. And especially because kidney transplants are paused here at the minute. So how will we catch up with all of these surgeries that have to go ahead? I realise that's on a slightly similar theme to the previous question. Would anyone like to? Ryan, you've raised your hand. Go on ahead.
I'll volunteer to start the answer to this, if that's okay, and maybe hand over to some of my clinical colleagues. I saw the question when it came up, and I think really it's talking about infrastructure around everything that supports transplantation going ahead, and making sure that increases in line with what we want to see in the increase in consent and the increase in donation going ahead. I think Dominic covered it really quite well there in his last answer. The infrastructure is really strong that we have here. There's a whole lot that goes on, and Phil talked about the process around the conversation. That's where Monica and Heather and colleagues have that close conversation with families, and all of the medical infrastructure that supports that conversation, and then the process for donation to go ahead. So that is in place and works really well, I think, across our intensive care units. And just if you can remember back to some of the numbers that Phil presented, we're talking around about 90 to 100 people per year who are in that situation who may be potential donors in Northern Ireland, so it's fairly small, and the number of patients in the last full year was just above 50, where the consent rate went ahead. So we're to bring that up to an 80%. You know, it's not a huge jump in terms of numbers, and I think the infrastructure is there to support that. But we do work closely with Claire and Phil and colleagues. We're entering a new phase of a UK strategy for organ donation and transplantation as well with the other UK nations, which aims to address exactly that the infrastructure grows in line with the increased consent rate. But I'll maybe ask Monica or Phil or Claire if they want to add to that bit, because they'd be closer to the development of that than I would.
If I start and then my colleagues can maybe add in. Again, I agree with what Ryan just said, and part of our job within NHS Blood and Transplant is kind of monitoring how many potential donors there are, how many transplants do we need, what are the resources that we need, and making sure that we feed in and plug in that information to the government or to the commissioners, to the health services, so that we've got the resources that we need in the system. Because I certainly, you've heard from Ryan, but all the governments across the UK, and obviously, as we just heard, Dahi travels over to England for some of his care. We need the resources across the UK because it's a UK service, and certainly all of the governments are just 100% behind organ donation and doing everything that they can to support it. And this, you know, introduction of the new law is just that next stage along that supports the work that people like Martin and others have done to raise awareness and get more public support.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to chip in on that question?
I think just to add in, I think this is from a clinical point of view. The change to the legislation doesn't increase the donor pool. Again, I think that's the important thing to remember, that the patients that we would ordinarily, or their families that we would ordinarily go to speak to, they're going to be on the intensive care units anyway. Okay, if you remember the slide that I showed where the patient comes in, they have treatment prognostication or observation, and then a decision is made on futility. All of that is completely independent of organ donation. So those families and those patients are always going to be there. There isn't an increase in the number of potential donors. What we're looking for is an increase in the number of families that support donation going ahead. So from a critical care unit point of view, that infrastructure already exists because they're already supporting those potential donors. The squeeze will come is where there are more potential, where more families say yes. Obviously, those patients will spend a bit more time on the intensive care unit while we facilitate that. And then it's about making sure that we've got the right number of retrieval teams and those sorts of things that are available to support.
Thank you, Phil. Does anyone else want to jump in on that question, or shall we move on? There's a question that's just come in here that says, what happens to the donor body after the donation? Does it delay funerals, etc.? I suppose people might be concerned about the normal grieving processes and the normal funeral process, and whether that's impacted at all by donating organs. Would anyone like to make a start on that question anyway? Monica, go on ahead.
Yeah, I'm happy to chip in. So yes, I'm Monica. I am the regional manager for the Organ Donation Nursing Service. So nurse by background. Heather Savage, a member of our team, is a specialist nurse currently working on the ground. She may want to chip in. But in essence, part of our end of life care for our families includes, as Phil has said as part of his presentation, every element of what is important to the patient and to the family. So yes, we do know that traditionally within Northern Ireland, arrangements around funerals, wakes are quite sort of time sensitive for a lot of people. But we've worked very, very hard over the years in our conversations with our families to ensure that they are aware that the funeral and their plans for the funeral with regard to open coffins and wakes are not affected in any way by the donor operation. an open coffin, even in respect of eye donation, can still occur, and we take exceptional care of the patient and their body. It's a surgical operation like any other surgery. Sometimes families do have concerns about the length of time involved, but if they are committed to the actual gift of donation, we will work with them to try and expedite it in as timely a way as we can, and we attempt to give them assurances that within a day their loved one's body will be returned to them. So yes, it is something that is asked, but increasingly with support for donation as a key part of end-of-life care, families are willing to work with us to compromise, and certainly the traditional funeral approaches really can continue as normal. I think Heather was going to add something else from her perspective.
Yeah, I was just going to say, thanks, Monica. I don't really have anything else to add except to say that we do work very hard to facilitate any end-of-life wishes that families have, and we have worked very hard at that. And I think in most occasions, the families' wishes are carried out with end-of-life care, and most people, when they've agreed to organ donation, are happy then to allow the donation process to take whatever time it needs to take, and for their loved ones then to come home to them whenever that's complete. That's all I had to say.
Thank you so much, Monica and Heather. I think time is sort of pushing on here, so we'll maybe just have time for one or two more questions. There's a question here about, this is from Cheryl, who's a 58-year-old CF, cystic fibrosis patient, and is wondering about the average wait time at the moment for a double lung transplant. If anyone would like to take that for Cheryl. Go on ahead, Claire.
I saw that coming in earlier on, and I spent quality time with our reports whilst earlier on. So I'm not sure about the double lung transplant, but the average wait, the median waiting time for adults for a lung transplant is 422 days, according to our last annual report, with the range going from 212 days to 617 days. So the median time is 422. That's just for lungs. I'm not sure about double lungs, but that's just the general figure for lungs.
Thank you very much. If anyone would like to chip in with a little last remark now, please pop up your hand and feel free to do so. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have for questions tonight. But please, if you would like to say a last remark, do. Otherwise, I'll hand back to Emma. I think we'll probably try to take note of all those unanswered questions and maybe try to get an answer out to you if possible, Emma. Would that be right?
Yes, definitely. I'm wondering how we could...
I can start typing quickly because I have got some answers to some of the others because I did more maths. So I'll start typing quickly.
Oh, yeah,
that would be wonderful.
Yes, if you're happy to do that, Claire. Yes, perfect. If anyone has sent in a question and really wants their question answered, what you can do is, even if you can type into the chat, you can privately send your question to us along with your email, and we can forward it on to the relevant people if you want to remain anonymous, if that's okay with everyone. So I think that is us for this evening. I just want to say on behalf of the whole committee again, thank you so much to everyone who both attended tonight, our panelists and our speakers. You were all fantastic. I just think this event went brilliant, much better than I expected even. So one more thing I'd just like to say. So this event was recorded and it'll be up on our YouTube channel if you want to watch it back. And then we also have got another session coming up on advanced care planning. It's the final one in our series. And it's really an engagement session. So it's quite interactive, really, for you to give your thoughts on any changes that you think should be made within the advanced care planning here in Northern Ireland. So it will be very interactive and open, or you can send your comments in anonymously as well. We don't have a date for that at the moment, but if you keep an eye on our social media pages, we'll have plenty of posts going up about that. So I think that is me, really. And feel free to email us as well. We are healthcareleaders@qub.ac.uk, and you can see that in the chat there. Okay, so thank you all so much, and we really appreciate you giving up your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.